In the 19th century, the world was a much different place. Air travel was still a fantasy, so long-distance journeys took much longer, causing no end of problems in the transportation of passengers and cargo by sea. But in 1767, one man had a plan to change it all. Henry Bell was a man with a vision to take a land-based steam engine, used to power trains and other large machinery, and use it to drive a ship. His pioneering concept would revolutionise the shipping industry, changing the world forever. Henry Bell was born on the 7th of April 1767 in Refurbishing, a small village in the southeast of Scotland. It wasn't long before he became obsessed by the possibilities of steam-powered boats, even writing to the British Admiralty in 1800 to illustrate the practicability and utility of applying steam to the propelling of vessels against winds and tides and every other obstruction on rivers and seas where there was a depth of water. He wrote again in 1803 but failed to gain sufficient support, despite the declaration of the celebrated Lord Nelson, who advised the Lords, "If you do not adopt Mr. Bell's scheme, other nations will, and it will succeed, and you should encourage Mr. Bell." Nelson's prophecy was to prove correct, as Bell, not one to be dissuaded and as passionate as ever, began correspondence with Robert Fulton of the USA, resulting in the building of the first commercially successful ship of its kind, the North River steamboat. From its maiden voyage in 1807, the paddle steamer would carry passengers the 300-mile trip from New York City to Albany. This would be the catalyst that would motivate Bell, and by 1811 he'd taken steps to turn his dream into a reality. I received a letter from Mr. Fulton, letting me know that he had constructed a steamboat from the different drawings of machinery I'd sent him out, but it required some improvement. This led me to think of the absurdity of writing my opinion to other countries and not putting it in practice myself in my own country. And, from these considerations, I was roused to set on foot a steamboat, from which I made a number of different models before I was satisfied. I contracted with Messrs. Jordan Wood and Company to build me a steam vessel, according to my plans, and I called her the Comet because she was built and finished the same year that a comet appeared in the northwest part of Scotland. John Wood Sr. had agreed to build the vessel if Bell found the engine, but died shortly after signing the contract for the job. The responsibility fell to his sons, John and Charles, who had encouraged him to take the job in the first place. Bell held up his side of the bargain and, for £165, bought an experimental engine, built by John Robertson, to drive the two paddle wheels mounted on each side. It was based on the design of the contraption used to pump seawater into the Helensburgh baths, where Bell was employed. The engine itself was powered by a boiler purchased on credit from boilermaker David Napier, a debt the vessel was allegedly never able to pay off. Rated at 3 horsepower, the engine was capable of propelling the ship at a speed of 5 miles per hour. Henry Bell claimed that his vessel is the first steamboat built in Europe that answered the end, and is at this present time upon the best and simplest method of any of them, for a person sitting in the cabin will hardly hear the engine at work. During trials of his ship, Bell spotted the Great Comet, a heavenly body that at the time held a record for remaining visible to the naked eye for over 260 days. Struck by awe and sudden inspiration, he made this the namesake of his vessel, and the Comet was born.
Henry Bell designed, John Wood built, the mother of the great steamship. This tiny boat, fueled by coal and steam, brought to life the man's great dream. In 1812 it sailed the Clyde. All who viewed filled with pride. This comet soared upon the wave to Helensburgh that summer a day.
On the 24th of July 1812, the Comet was launched, and the following month Bell was advertising in local newspapers. The 3-hour trip, for a fare of 4 shillings for the best cabin and 3 shillings for the second, was to become the first commercially successful passenger steamboat service in Europe. Within 4 years, the success of this pioneering service had inspired other services on the Firth of Clyde, and the route became extremely competitive. So much so that in 1816 the Comet was transferred to operate a more leisurely service on the Firth of Forth, but unsuccessful and being outshone by its competitors, she was called back to the Clyde to be upgraded. In September 1819, after lengthening and a new engine being installed to increase the power from 3 to 6 horsepower, the Comet began to operate a service launched from Glasgow to Oban and Fort William via the Crinean Canal, pioneering the Royal Route, later dominated by David McBrain Limited. Disaster struck on the 13th of December 1820 when, on approach to Oban, the Comet was caught in the infamous Doris Moor, Gaelic for Big Door, a whirlpool created where the tides met, and it was reported to have broken in two. The vessel was driven onto the rocks at Craignish Point, and although no one was hurt, it looked like Henry Bell's vision was short-lived. Refusing to watch his dream falter, Henry Bell enlisted the financial aid of a number of wealthy gentlemen, and in 1821 the Comet II is completed, with the intention that it will continue the Highland service with which Bell had eventually found success.
The ship once more. La 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 la. Breathe life into the ship once more.
This new ship was designed with the failings of its predecessor in mind, and, as such, was built to withstand the elements. The modified design would prove futile, however, as, on the morning of Friday, 21st of October 1825, owing to a series of unfortunate circumstances and professional negligence, the Comet II collided at full speed with the air steamer off Kempert Point, with such force and violence that the Comet sunk in under 3 minutes. Unfortunately, the passengers aboard the Comet II were not as lucky as those on its predecessor's dramatic final journey, as 62 of the 80 were killed during the collision. After the loss of his second vessel, the ill-fated nature of his life's passion became apparent to Bell, and he abandoned his work on steam navigation, dying 4 years later at the age of 62.
In August 1912, Port Glasgow held Centenary celebrations to mark the anniversary of the launch of the Comet. It was a fantastic, almost indescribable display of civic pride. This festival atmosphere sparked a community to capture this community spirit, and through an army of volunteers, the Comet Festival developed into an annual celebration.
I'm delighted to see so many of you.
In 1962, Sir William Lithgow commissioned a replica of the original Comet to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the launch of the first ship. The hull of the replica was contracted to shipbuilder George Thomson of Buckie, while the engine and fit-out undertaken by local shipyards. During its construction, changes were made to the original 1812 plans to accommodate newer shipbuilding methods and materials. Nothing like the 1962 restoration had ever been attempted before, as to recreate the Comet in full working order meant not only restoration but new design. The shipbuilders and designers involved had to put themselves in the shoes of a blacksmith a century ago and wonder how the job should be tackled.
I served my time in Thompson's shipyard, and at the time I was seconded up to the boat building yard when the Comet was about to be built. My task was to operate the boiler for steaming the planks, and it was usually about 2 planks we put into the steam box one time, and To seal the box, you used sawdust and hard bags to and got the pressure up, steamed it for about a 3/4 an hour, and during that time,
Why?
The-
Why
the-
would you run like hell?
the other carpenters would have they'd be playing in their other planks, ready to go in when we took it up.
Did you find they were pliable enough after an hour in the steamer for the bow?
Oh, for a bow, yes.
Plank was put on and then it was bent and there was big clamps to this thing up to pull them back into place.
And it had to be
Then they
done
had
as
to
quick
fix them
as
then.
you know, the heat. The Comet, as I say, was built in the shed. So then to get the Comet outside was a daunting task in itself.
Saturday, September 1st, 1962. The long-awaited replica of the now infamous PS Comet is launched from Lithgow's yard, from the very same berth in which the original was built. The following day, 11 dignitaries, attired in period costume, sailed from Greenock to Helensburgh and back, escorted by a flotilla of canoes, dinghies, yachts and motorboats, before retiring to its final resting place in Port Glasgow town centre. Unfortunately, after years of sitting idly in a shallow pond, battling the elements and pollution from a busy nearby road, the replica would fall into disrepair, and in 1998, a much overdue refurbishment was authorised. In 2007, the exposed nature of the site once again took its toll, and the plinth upon which the replica rested had to be replaced. The local authority took this opportunity to re-site the landmark. (2010), and with little or no maintenance or care having been bestowed upon the little ship, it's time for another refurbishment.
We move from the east of the country to the west now, but we stay on the water because if you've passed through Port Glasgow recently, you may have noticed the town is missing one of its cultural icons, the Comet. A replica has been on display in Port Glasgow since 1962, but it's fallen into disrepair, and a group of young local trainees has been set the challenge of renovating it. So, BBC Scotland's LAB, that's Learn at BBC Scotland, went along to the busy
Actually, not here
workshops
to look
of
at the boat.
Ferguson's yard.
And I can see all the rotten boards, and I see I'm going to mark these with white X's to give you an idea what we think's to be replaced. But obviously, in the process of removing one board, we discovered the next one was just as bad. Surface-wise, it looked fine, but as soon as you disturb the board, as you and I both know it, it just crumbled away, and you went, oh, the neighbour need to come and see marked that one, so you just kept going. So what turned out to be just a few boards turned out to be a major set-up altogether. I couldn't believe that after 10 years that would be like that. That's primarily down to lack of maintenance and certainly not covering the boat, which was one of the intentions, I believe.
The last time I saw it, and I was nearly crying, seeing how the planks were opening up and she had been neglected. There was no maintenance. It was obvious.
We are fast approaching the ship's bicentennial, and a revitalised, rebuilt Comet will be the centrepiece for the celebrations.
Years later, a replica was built as a symbol of the port. On launch day, the press were there to the world's the report. When she reached Helensburgh, escorted by 200 boats, with the crew and the passenger all glad that she floats. Leaving from the same place she did years before. When the fireworks started, 15,000 people all let out a roar. It was starting to rain, but no complaints from the crowd. 6 months for the job, lads, you should be feeling so proud.
'Wonderful, what a terrific project, the restoration of the Comet there at Port Glasgow. And you can see
But that's the past we built. It stands a testament to us so well. Still hand in love on this port store. Lead life into the ship once more. La 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 la. Lead life into the ship once more. Breathe life into the ship once